The crystal tumbler clinked against metal, a sharp sound that sliced through the conversation and laughter. My father, Douglas, lifted his bourbon toward the chandelier, his voice booming with practiced authority. To my son, Marcus, the rightful heir to the entire Cascade Mountain estate, all $22 million of it. 60 people erupted in applause. My brother basked in it like sunlight, grinning like royalty accepting a crown. I stood near the stone fireplace, clutching a single folder against my ribs. I didn't weep. I didn't react. I just smiled, a thin, cold curve that didn't reach my eyes. I locked eyes with Bennett, the family's attorney, and spoke 5 words that turned the celebration into a funeral. None of you actually know, do you? My father's face went from triumphant to furious in half a heartbeat. Know what? Before I tell you what was inside that folder and why my brother's expression went from arrogant to terrified in under 5 seconds, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I want to see how far the truth can travel. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 12 years, I haven't been a daughter to these people. I've been a self-operating maintenance system, a property algorithm with a pulse. While the room stared at me, demanding an explanation, I let the silence expand. I wanted them to feel the pressure of it, because before I dismantled their kingdom, I needed to remember exactly who constructed it. For 12 years, I managed the Cascade estate. I didn't just oversee it. I gave it life. I spent 90-hour weeks arguing with county officials over environmental permits for the lakefront dock. I negotiated with vendors who inflated bids by 50% the moment they saw our family name on the contract. I was the one responding at 2 in the morning when a heating system failed in the guest quarters, standing in sub-freezing temperatures while my father slept comfortably in the main residence. And Marcus, my younger brother, spent those 12 years on what Douglas called expansion opportunities. We all understood what they actually were. Extended gambling trips to Atlantic City, ski vacations in Switzerland, and recovery retreats in the Bahamas to decompress from the exhausting burden of being the chosen heir. He couldn't distinguish a property deed from a takeout menu. Yet every time a renovation finished ahead of schedule and under budget, because of me, Douglas would grip his shoulder proudly and announce, "Outstanding work, son. You're building a dynasty." They believed they were exploiting me. They believed I was the compliant backup child, desperate for a fragment of validation. But they didn't realize that, while I was repairing their infrastructure and balancing their finances, I was also learning where every weakness was hidden. I was learning the regulations, the statutes, and the loopholes. They broke me emotionally back then, made me feel invisible. But today, I'm the one holding the weapon. The final breaking point occurred exactly 9 days ago. I had entered Douglas's office carrying a stack of quarterly reports. The estate had just posted its most profitable year in history, entirely because of a restructuring strategy I had engineered. I sat down and finally requested what I had earned. I didn't ask for half. I asked for 15% equity, a small acknowledgement that I was the engine driving his comfortable existence. Douglas didn't just refuse. He looked at me with genuine bewilderment, as if his microwave had suddenly demanded a promotion. "Equity," he laughed, pouring himself another drink. "Claire, you don't receive equity, you receive housing, you receive security." "I do all the work, Dad," I said, my voice shaking in a way I despised. "Marcus contributes nothing. I built this value. I've earned a stake." That's when the facade crumbled. He slammed his glass down hard, amber liquid splashing across his desk. "You earned nothing," he said, his voice ice cold. "I fed you for 18 years, I clothed you, I paid for your education. You think that came without cost?" He circled the desk, leaning into my space, his eyes empty and predatory. "You aren't a partner, Claire. You're my investment. I poured resources into raising you so you could serve this family. You don't collect dividends from the business. You are the business's infrastructure. Don't confuse your function with your value." I sat there, feeling something inside me calcify into stone. That was the moment. That was the narcissistic equation that governed my entire life. To him, I wasn't a child deserving love. I was a debt that could never be settled. I was a tool that had started requesting maintenance. I walked out of his office without another word. He assumed he had reasserted control. He assumed I went to my room to process the humiliation. Instead, I went to my private workspace, opened the lockbox, and retrieved the folder I had been protecting for 4 years. He wanted return on investment. Fine. I was about to liquidate everything. Being the spare child isn't about coming in second place. It's about existing as an insurance policy nobody wants to pay premiums on. You're kept functional solely for emergency deployment, then shoved back into storage when the crisis passes. For the past 4 years, I lived in that storage closet. I watched Marcus treat the business I built like his personal expense account. He didn't just spend capital, he incinerated it. There was the incident when he invested $70,000 in a startup recommended by someone he met at a poker game in Monaco. When the venture collapsed, Douglas didn't express anger. He summoned me to his office and instructed me to restructure the books to absorb the loss. He said Marcus was an entrepreneur who understood calculated risk. He said I was too conservative to comprehend high-level business strategy. I didn't argue. I adjusted the ledgers, but I also created a duplicate of every transaction. I logged dates, amounts, and digital footprints. Then there was the charity gala 3 summers ago. Marcus was responsible for securing the event permits. He forgot, naturally, because he was occupied on a yacht off the Greek coast. 3 days before the event, the city threatened to shut us down for permit violations. I spent 72 consecutive hours at municipal offices, leveraging every contact I'd cultivated, compensating clerks with coffee and persistence, and manually rewriting compliance documents. I saved the event. That evening, Douglas raised his glass during dinner. To Marcus, he proclaimed, beaming, for orchestrating the social event of the season. Marcus grinned, swirling his wine casually. It was nothing, really, he said. Just requires a little strategic charm. Then he glanced at me, sitting at the far end of the table in my work clothes, eyes burning from exhaustion. You look drained, Claire. Maybe get some sleep. Let the real players handle the victory lap. The entire table laughed. Cousins, uncles, business associates. They looked at me with that sympathetic expression people reserve for service staff. They saw an exhausted, unremarkable woman with an unhealthy attachment to paperwork. They mocked my organizational systems. They dismissed my attention to documentation. They laughed then. But they didn't know those meticulous records were the foundation I was building to collapse their empire. They didn't know that every time they minimized me, I was archiving evidence of criminal activity. Every forged authorization Marcus created, I preserved. Every asset Douglas relocated to evade taxation, I documented. They assumed I maintained the records to protect them. I was maintaining the records to destroy them. Sitting at that dinner table, sipping water while they celebrated with champagne, I understood something that changed everything. They didn't hate me. Hatred requires acknowledgement. They simply didn't perceive me. I was the plumbing. I was the electrical system. I was essential infrastructure, completely invisible until I stopped functioning. And that was their catastrophic error. Because when you treat someone like equipment, you forget that equipment has no allegiance. You forget that if you stress a machine beyond capacity, it doesn't complain. It just fails. And when it fails, it takes the entire operation down with it. Back in the living room, the applause for Marcus finally subsided. My father turned toward me, irritated that I had disrupted his moment. He assumed I was about to make an emotional appeal about fairness. He assumed I was going to plead for equity again. He had absolutely no idea that the equity had already been transferred. Years ago, I stepped forward, the hardwood creaking beneath my shoes. The folder felt substantial in my hands, weighted with 4 years of documentation. I looked at Marcus. He was smirking, wearing that same superior expression he'd carried since childhood. He believed he had won. He believed the crown was already secured. He didn't know it was constructed from lies. And he didn't know I was holding the match. Marcus detached himself from a cluster of investors and crossed to where I stood. He reeked of expensive whiskey and unearned arrogance. He leaned against the bookcase, examining me with that half-lidded, condescending look he reserved for people he considered beneath him. "Don't look so bitter, Claire," he said quietly, his voice low enough that nearby guests couldn't detect the malice. "Someone has to lose so someone else can win. That's basic economics." "You haven't won anything, Marcus," I replied evenly. "You were gifted something you didn't earn." He laughed sharply. "Earn? Who cares about earning? Possession is 9/10 of law, and as of 10 minutes ago, I possess everything." He gestured expansively at the room, the view, the artwork. "I'm already implementing changes, real vision, starting with the caretaker's cottage." My chest tightened. "The cottage isn't vacant." "It is now," he said casually, taking a drink. "I had it cleared this afternoon, converting it into an entertainment lounge. Billiards, humidor, full bar. Needed the space for tonight's after-party." I stared at him. "Marcus, Mrs. Patterson lives there." Mrs. Patterson was Grandma Catherine's oldest friend. She was 84, fragile, and terrified of displacement. Grandma had guaranteed her lifetime residency. I had been the one ensuring her utilities functioned, delivering groceries, making sure she felt secure. "Not anymore," Marcus shrugged. "I informed her to collect her belongings, had some guys relocate her items to the extended stay off Highway 9. She was emotional about it, exhausting, really. But you can't allow sentiment to interfere with asset optimization." I felt the blood leave my face. He hadn't just evicted a tenant. He had removed an elderly woman who was practically family, just to create a space for cigars and card games with his degenerate associates. He hadn't even waited for the transfer paperwork to finalize. He had done it this afternoon, before he technically owned anything. "She's 84, I whispered. "You put an 84-year-old woman in a roadside motel." "I eliminated dead weight, Claire, which brings me to you." He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Dad and I discussed it. We don't require a property manager anymore. I have connections who can handle operations. And honestly, it's not like you have alternatives. No spouse, no children, no prospects. You're biologically irrelevant." He tapped a finger against my shoulder. "Here's the arrangement. You can occupy your studio above the garage for 30 days while you search for employment. But tonight, you're staff. Go find a mop and clean up the spilled drinks in the hallway. Make yourself useful for once."